Well, I believe I'm here by myself right now. We are getting connected with others. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Hi, Bill. How you doing?
Wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome, welcome.
Let's see. Looks like we have some folks still just joining here. I'm getting adjusted. All right.
Yeah. Here we go again. I
Yes.
want to pull the slides up here for a minute. We've got a good group coming today. I'm kind of excited. We've got lots of good old friends and some new friends, which I trust will be good friends as well as we move along.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think we have technical issues out of the way and ready to ready to lead with some good stuff.
It's time to create some new social norms.
That's right.
All right, well, do you want to get started? I think it is 10:30.
Yeah, we good on recording?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone that is with us live or catching us after the fact. It is my honor to be a part of this. My name is Bill, and we'll do some proper introductions in just a bit. But I founded an organization called Good Cinema as an objective, or excuse me, as a platform to bring community together to have open conversations about issues affecting us and being able to implement action. And so much of that is within the work that Leslie Jones does. And I was recently introduced to the SpiralMethod as a way to, as we see here, really rapidly create trust and vulnerability in groups. And as we're kind of transitioning into what is looking like a new normal, and we may not be able to gather in large groups for a while, I think it's very important for us to be supporting each other and helping each other along our paths within our among our peers, among our coworkers, colleagues, friends, etc. And as you'll see as we dive in, some of the tools that are part of the SpiralMethod really help increase trust and vulnerability, and we'll be breaking that down. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to announce Ms. Leslie Jones.
Oh, thank you, Bill. I'm so glad that you're here. Bill is a certified SpiralMethod facilitator, and I am so excited about the community that we have and that we continue to grow and build right now. I've been on a mission for 25 years to change the way that we work and live in community. And now with COVID, it feels like what a perfect time. And people are waking up and wanting this more and more now. You know, I really believe it's time to saturate humanity with new social norms. And for me, that's what this is all about. Creating trust and vulnerability in group settings. There is so much richness, so much available, and I believe that we all want that. So we will talk a little bit more as we go here about who we are and what we're up to, but I just want to speak, you know, to the people here. Again, there's a lot of new faces here and there's a lot of old faces here. And what we're finding is that people coming forward into this work are fiercely committed to community. And there's a level of confidence and vulnerability and nourishment that happens when we lead from what we're going to talk about today, leading from our heart and really sinking in and being members of the community versus the person at the front of the room with the PowerPoint presentation. People are asking, what is community? How do we build community? How do we create trust and vulnerability? We know that there's more possible than what's actually happening in my groups, whether it's a work group or in a family or even with peers. And so we know that you here on this call are in that inquiry with us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's see here. So we really, we're going to talk about a lot. Fundamentally and at the core, we're going to talk about setting core ground rules and how to do that well. We're really going to give you some new tools to easily create trust and vulnerability and dig into those a bit. Talk about how to role model vulnerability. How do we do this without losing our power as a facilitator? Really important distinctions around this. Again, we want to be both participants and guides. And enjoy the value of that position. How do we hold space for our members' vulnerability? Still have an outcome and an agenda, but also be flexible. And then leading in a way that's nourishing so that you're not exhausted when you're finished leading any kind of meeting. Bill, let me give you a chance to introduce yourself again, and then I'll introduce myself a bit more.
Sure, and just leading into this, I just wanted to add one piece from the slide before, and that's really all of this is about really creating that safe container. And that was the biggest initial piece that I kind of got out of this was in these larger events I would host, much of, I guess, the creating that kind of safety for people to really feel like they're okay being vulnerable and they can really open up and be heard. Because I think that need resides in all of us, is really creating that safe container. And I can speak to that a little bit more later. But a bit on me, I founded an organization called Good Cinema a couple of years ago as a platform to bring together community to watch impactful films about issues affecting us personally and as a society. And then bringing in expert panelists and opening up to audience discussions to really create a safe space for public discourse. Now that we are unable to gather in theaters and in large groups, I've really kind of shifted my work towards the small group and am focusing much more on helping to drive impact deeply within individuals. And the Spiral Method has truly been profound in allowing me to open up into really creating these groups and safe spaces for people in a time that many of us are still very isolated and consumed by fear. And so what we're doing is hoping to create more and more communities so that we can support each other along our paths to living our most fulfilled lives.
Yeah, and you guys check out Good Cinema. The work that Bill is doing over there is amazing, and continuing to expand and enhance his offerings as well for impact and community development. So it's so awesome to be partnering with you, Bill. If you don't know me, I'm Leslie Jones. I've been on a mission to end the disconnection gap and to change the way that we work and live in community for a very, very long time, 25 years at least. And I've worked globally. I've worked with all sorts of leadership teams and leaders, CEOs, and over the course of the past 10 years, unbeknownst to me, I was developing and nurturing this Spiral Method and spent the past year getting it into a format where I can train people to hold this very, just privileged position of guiding people. And so we launched in February, and we have about 25 Spiral Method facilitators right now, and I'm really on a mission to make that hundreds of thousands over these coming years. So let's see here. Bill, I wanted you to speak a little bit about what you got out of the certification program, and then we'll jump into the material.
Absolutely. So the certification program opened my eyes to a few things. One that, I guess the first thing was that I thought, Well, just by laying out some ground rules at the beginning of events, an event, that creates a safe space. And I found that it's much more than that. It involves things like decluttering, like setting agreements among folks, and kind of some of these kind of core ground rules within the Spiral Method are specifically focused on that safety. The next piece was these games of connection. They're so simple yet so effective in really bringing out what we like to call the people magic out of these groups. And all of this is back to our kind of main objective here, creating that trust and vulnerability. And not only that, but helping people really uncover their stories, remove their masks, and expose who they are. And so for me, it's introduced me to new and innovative ways of working with people that really help drive us towards our best selves.
Thanks, Bill. You know, we didn't mention, we are open to questions throughout our time. So we do have quite a bit of material that we're going to go through, but Bill will be managing the chat room. If there's any question you guys have, send it right over and Bill will interrupt me as needed. Okay. So let's first talk about some core premises here. So it is really important to understand that human beings, what I've learned is that we all want to be seen and heard and understood. We actually like vulnerability. It's nourishing to be vulnerable. But at the same time, we don't jump at the idea. You know, that's a general rule when we say, okay, let's be vulnerable now. Everyone's not like, not me. Okay, it's my turn to be vulnerable. Similar to this over these years when I am in a room and I say, who really wants feedback? Everyone generally raises their hand. And then I ask who feels comfortable delivering feedback. And most people don't raise their hand around delivering feedback. So there's something in there around what's in the way of vulnerability and giving and receiving feedback, even though fundamentally there's a need for that, is what I found. Being in a trusting environment is a desire and is very valuable for us human beings. It's another core premise. And the only way to really expand our capacity for vulnerability is to practice it. We've all been burned. We've all had vulnerability backfire on us. And so how do we create an environment where we can calibrate and learn and heal and expand our capacity for vulnerability? That's what we're going to talk about, and that's what Spiral Method does. And then also another core premise, everyone is responsible for their own well-being. So as a guide or the person holding the container, you are also responsible for your own well-being, and you're going to set a container for people to play and grow. And they are responsible for themselves.
Yeah, and if I can add something there, I think one other big piece that those core premises help with is pulling us out of our, I guess, autopilot, our standard way of being, our standard way of thinking, where we're typically up in our heads and thinking intellectually. These really help push us down into our hearts and open up to truly what's possible, getting us out of the patterns and habits and ways of thinking and speaking, and helping to open us up to what is underneath all of that.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yep. Okay, so given those core premises, we are not causing trust and vulnerability. That's not our job. Our job is actually, as the facilitator, is to hold the container so that we're minimizing barriers to human beings' natural state and maximizing a space that's conducive for vulnerability and a deepening of trust. You know, I just want to name around this that the way that we deepen trust is by bumping up against the edges, by having our fear come up, by having our resistance to vulnerability or getting burned even, right? And keeping our feet in the fire in our relationships. And that gets a lot more complicated when we're talking about group dynamics. We'll continue to talk about that in this webinar and many others to come, but important to name. So, you know, listen, you guys, we can all Google best practices for facilitators. I'm going to assume that you all have these down. You know, these are better spoken about than, or easier to talk about than they are actually to practice, right? So, you know, having everyone's voices be heard sounds really great, but how do we actually do that in practice in the moment? There are power dynamics, there are ego dynamics, there's drama that's happening, there's judgment and assessment, there's trauma, past issues that are coming up. You know, like, you know, everyone pick a partner, and then all of a sudden we're back to being in PE when we have to pick basketball teams when we're 12 years old, right? So there's a lot to say about group dynamics. For the sake of today, we're going to assume that you all know these and that you're practiced in them. They're fundamental. Bill, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, you know, when I started hosting events, I thought this was kind of the secret sauce. I thought it was just the basics. Leading with this would create the trust and vulnerability we were looking for, and little did I know there was something extra that that really helped, I would say, accelerate the ability to get there and really create a space that that becomes extremely safe and helps people really dive deep within themselves and support each other in profound ways. That's what we'll be getting into here in a sec.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just noticing in the groups, in my groups that have really deepened over time and developed a level of trust and vulnerability and community, they are holding the container with me now. And that's part of the beauty of SpiralMethod, is that we are training everyone to be responsible for what happens in the space of our meetings. And so it is interesting because some of this is so fundamental as you get started, and then over time, it's almost everyone's becoming a facilitator. Today, we really want to dive into the more advanced skill sets and what's available, and why I created SpiralMethod in the first place, and what is important for all of us as facilitators for creating vulnerability. So the first one is that you're on your edge. I have found, hands down, when I am on my edge, people are more impacted. They are more engaged, and they are kind of coming back to me years and years later, sharing the lessons that they got from those meetings and how that has rippled out in their own lives over time. You know, we have this idea of leadership that we've got to have it all figured out, or we have the answers. To show up and simply hold a container is edgy in and of itself for most people. We don't know what's going to happen. This can be quite uncomfortable, and this is actually the good news, because we want to be showing up into our meetings in a way that allows for the collective wisdom. And if we've got it all figured out, there's no space for the collective wisdom, right? So it's absolutely critical we are able to pivot quickly, give up our agenda, listen deeply to what's happening in the group. And for most people, that means that's going to be uncomfortable. I'm training a group right now, and the idea of going to a meeting without an answer or a solution, these are, you know, CEOs, kind of type A, you know, this is extremely uncomfortable. Bill, what do you want to say about this distinction?
Yeah, I mean, the edge is where growth occurs. And when we're talking about work with groups, so much of it is about the growth as a group and growth for each individual together. And personally, I've found that my edge is the only place that I'm able to grow and where I learn more about myself and my experience. And when I first started out hosting Good Cinema events, I would get on stage and be very nervous at first, and I would get short of breath. And so I decided one day to show up and be completely vulnerable and authentic, and just say that, hey guys, I get nervous up here. Can you all close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths with me? And that not only allowed me to push through the discomfort and get to a place of more calm, but that ended up being something that we started all of our events with as a way of grounding and getting people in the here and now and present. And so that edge not only helped me grow, but it helped the organization implement a really cool new way to start events, as well as gave the audience permission to then be vulnerable themselves because I was modeling that up front.
Well, that's perfect. The next distinction here is that mask begets mask and vulnerability begets vulnerability. I have a great example of this actually. And it's not fun to be in mask. That's another really important piece. So I walked in, I was about to lead a group of 25 women, and they were all brand new women to me. And I was so excited and feeling really grounded and confident and ready to go. And I walked into the, pre-meeting where everyone is socializing, and immediately was just taken aback and gripped by my mask. They seemed like everyone was in cliques. They were all dressed better than me, right? That was one of the storylines that I had going on. Like, who do I go talk to? Why would they even listen to me? And it just took me over, right? And I luckily recovered that time. I have other examples where I didn't recover, and I just was gripped by mask for the next 4 hours and trying to lead from that place, right? I think same to you, same as your example, Bill. This was a moment where I was able to masterfully share that in a way that allowed everyone else to exhale and sit in that meeting with me powerfully. This touches on how do we role model vulnerability without losing our power as a facilitator, right? So we're not processing with the group. When you're facilitating, you get to be vulnerable, and that doesn't mean you're processing. So one of my tips on that, or rules that I use, is that I'll share things that are very vulnerable in real life examples, but they are from the past, even if it was yesterday, but I've already done some processing on it for myself. So I'm not using this group for that. The other piece is I could briefly mention that I'm on edge about something and that it's very vulnerable for me, and I can talk about it for a moment to acknowledge, like, I'm having a rough time with my daughter right now and I don't know what to do, and then leave it at that, right? Those are a couple ways that we can share vulnerably and still be very responsible for our job as facilitator. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this especially modeled within groups, that once I'm able to, I guess the spiral method, as we're able to kind of go around and around through different rounds, as folks start to open up more, as folks start to kind of dive in deeper, that gives others permission to do so as well. And as the facilitator, it's more my job as a guide to help guide people through that, rather than, I guess, as you were saying, completely processing something out in the open. That said, still by leading with my authentic self, and by removing, I guess, the surface level conversation, informational questions, and diving more into curiosity, I've found that to really help people kind of open up and be more vulnerable.
Right. Yeah, it is an invitation. I think one more piece around this is, as a leader and a guide, being able to say, I don't know what to do right now, right? Like, so and to reflect back. We have 3 main themes that are happening, and I have an agenda in my mind. I think there's some ways that we could move forward, everyone. Let's vote, or what do you think, right? So oftentimes I'm working with leaders where that seems, they've never done that before, actually really ask the group. So I think that's another level of vulnerability, and being able to be with the role that you have and the discomfort potentially around that. Okay, the next one is, being an equal and a participant versus being on a pedestal or being the teacher. Again, there's a way that we think about leadership, especially in the United States, that we've been taught that what leadership is supposed to look like. I don't think that many of us have that many examples of this kind of leadership around equality, and we're all in this together, and you get to participate as a leader or guide instead of just having one role of lead and having that be separate from the people, right, that are in the community. So the room setup, right? We have ways that we set up the room. You sit in a circle with everyone else. You are not elevated in any way. We don't use PowerPoint. We don't use any kind of other teaching mechanisms, really, that other than sitting in the circle and having conversations with each other inside of a container and a format. Our way of being is also really fundamental, that we bring a participant and community member is our way of being. One of my coaches once said to me, I only need to be a half a step ahead of you to be able to guide you. And that's how I see our work here, is that we have a dual role of participant and guide, and we have studied group dynamics and this kind of leadership a half a step than the rest of the people generally. What do you want to add to that one, Bill?
Yeah, I would just add that this is a co-creative process, and it really relies so much on the participation of each member of the group, and it is so much more, the group is the sum of all of its parts than anyone as an individual, and that goes back to the facilitator as well. I really see myself as holding that container, as holding people to the agreements, helping to declutter, sticking to kind of the core tenets of the Spiral Method. But outside of that, I'm participating like everyone else and in it with them. And I think that in itself creates a higher level of trust, because there's no hierarchical or power over dynamics involved.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, so the next piece here is about the container. We've been talking about that a lot. I have found there are circles in the United States and globally even, actually, that know and use this terminology regularly, and that it's a fairly small group, this idea of holding a container. And then there's a lot of other folks that say, what do you mean container, right? So I think, one, it's important, we're talking about a structure. We're talking about the masculine, if you want to, equate it to masculine, feminine. The container is the solid boundaries, the structure that we set up. And our job as facilitator is to hold that container. We're guiding the ship. We're leading the conversation and directing the ship and making sure that the container is solid and strong, so that we have a lot of fluidity and flexibility in the middle, inside of the container. If we have too much container, too much structure, it's rigid. We squash the magic. And if we don't have enough container, if it's too flexible and too fluid, we also squash the magic. And so this balance between masculine and feminine energies, or the container and the fluidity, fundamental. And then it truly is magical what happens inside of a group of people. I often, will talk about this place of the magic in between. And I have found, I think this is a tangent to this conversation here, but that when I'm too much in myself, I lose something, and when I'm too out with the community, I lose something. There's also a magic in that space in between, which is what happens in these sessions. I guess there's just also the piece around setting the ground rules is a good example of container, and there are a lot of things that are happening in Spiral Method sessions around the container. But for all of us facilitating conversations that cultivate trust and vulnerability, ground rules are fundamental. And what I've found is that it has to be a co-created conversation when we look at ground rules. So inevitably, when I hand the rules or agreements to people, there's some pushback, right? It's really, really valuable to give a guideline for agreements and some examples of our agreements, chew on them, let everyone engage with them, and then have a co-created conversation of, are we buying into these agreements? What would we modify or add to them? What new agreements are people aware of that they want to add to these? I've found one too many sessions where the facilitator just says, these are agreements. Good? Everyone good? Okay, let's move on. And that's not sufficient in my experience. So yeah, we don't want to tell people, we want to create them. My groups, I think every group has some iterations on the agreements that I originally laid on the table.
Yeah, I think at the core, this sets up a structure to where it's less that people have to worry about. It's less intellectual because that part's already taken care of, and people in the group are able to open up more and be more safe because that structure is already created. It's not like they're thinking of what's happening next. We create the structure of who's going to be going next. What are these ground rules? What are these agreements? And it really opens up people to become more trusting and be more authentic during these conversations.
Yeah, and the last piece on this, when people co-create the ground rules, they own them, and then they also are responsible for and naturally step in when the ground rules or agreements are getting broken in some way. And for most of us, I would say we are not very trained in setting agreements, and more importantly, not trained in what to do when agreements get broken, right? And so there's a whole structure in Spiral Method, there's a whole structure for how do you address broken agreements. One of the things that's important is that you track how everyone's doing on the agreements and keep it as an alive conversation for at least the first 6 months of meetings, until it feels like you're no longer the one guiding and generating the integrity of the group around agreements. The group is doing that, right? And that because they start saying, wait a minute, someone broke an agreement, or let's talk about agreements. How are we doing on those?
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to groups kind of gaining their own culture, and that culture kind of holding a container of itself. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Now, this is, we'll talk about this more at the end, but everything that we're talking about today is embedded in the method itself. And this is why it's so easy to lead, right? Because it's just not a heavy lift. We don't have to do all this pre-work and post-work and management. It's all embedded in the method itself. Okay, so what if people don't feel safe? This is, I've experienced this so many times where there's a lack of safety and we don't know what to do. The facilitator doesn't know what to do. or the container isn't fully set yet, and someone jumps in too hard and too fast, which backfires and doesn't help set the container. It actually means you have to even step back further to get the container set. So, I mean, I have an example of that. Maybe I'll say that in a moment here, but if we notice that people aren't opening up, we have to calibrate a little bit, like check out, are we pressing too hard? Are we not talking about what's relevant? Is there something around the agreements that we're not bought into yet? I had a new group that I was working with recently, and it was more of a casual group of people that had come together, and all, you know, pretty high level leaders, high emotional intelligence. There was kind of an assumption from those of us facilitating that the safety was there. And so we opened up a dialogue. Let's talk about some of the ways that we're working with social distancing, and how, you know, what are we creating as we move forward? And silence, nothing. So, okay, what's going on out there, everyone? Well, I don't feel safe. So someone at least felt safe enough to say, I don't feel safe. And there were two people that spoke on this. One said, if I talk about my opinions about healthcare, I'm probably going to get attacked. And that is valid, because that's the world we've been living in, right? And so even in this high-level group where it seemed like everyone probably should feel safe, that had not gotten addressed. We didn't have any agreements around that or understanding about the nature of the conversation that we were about to have. The other person, I'm trying to remember what the other person said. Oh, someone else said, I'm really intimidated. The caliber of leaders here is intimidating. So just to speak in this is intimidating for me, which was in and of itself very vulnerable. Those two examples gave us a chance to look at core agreements and create them right then on the spot. Mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything, Bill?
Yeah, I would just add something, I guess, here very recently with a new group I've started. We're kind of balancing the meeting online versus potentially kind of coming together in person soon. And I think there's a level of not only safety around kind of health concerns currently, but also safety around people kind of expressing if they don't feel safe meeting. And so I just kind of put that out there as an agreement that if even one person does not feel safe gathering in person or wants to wear a mask when we do, you know, then all of us are going to do that. And so kind of getting that out in front so that people don't feel singled out, so that everyone does feel safe and is respecting that as a general agreement.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're noticing a level of lack of safety, and again, that shows up with silence, withdrawal, usually is my experience, we have to back up and look at the container instead of trying to push through and go, you know, pull out vulnerability. There's something that's causing a lack of vulnerability. That's what we have to get clear about. And you can ask people, they'll tell you. Generally, they'll tell you. Okay. The last piece is clutter. I have found this to be a pretty hot topic when I talk about this. So first of all, clutter as an individual, we have emotional clutter, we have mental clutter, we have physical clutter, we have spiritual clutter even. So when we walk into a room, we probably have some clutter, right? I think it's an act of mastery around our humanity to have practices in place that allow us to be present and not have clutter. And there are a lot of practices available, and I'm sure you all have many of them. Good to, as a facilitator, have those practices so that you can show up decluttered as an individual. Lots to say about that topic, but today we want to talk about the group clutter. Bill, I would love if you have any examples of this, or what you've experienced out there. But a couple important pieces. So as the facilitator, you definitely don't want to be cluttering up the space, right? And so one way that you don't clutter the space is that you always do what you say. If you make a promise, if you say you're going to email something, if you said something last time that you would follow up with this time, make sure you follow up with it this time. Okay, so this is a way that you create trust in your leadership as a guide to people. They go, you know what? He or she is reliable. I can trust that they're tracking what they're supposed to be tracking. They do what they say, right? This is a really important part. So let me see other ways that as a facilitator we clutter the space. Our agenda can be clutter. Our personal processing is clutter. What else, Bill?
I would say things like more of the emotional, mental clutter sometimes. Sometimes people are coming into a space and they're bringing in whatever they were dealing with that day. And so I like to clear that out with opening questions like, what's present for you now? What's still weighing on you? What's in your way? To kind of get that out of the way first before we really dive in. The other piece in this new world would be digital clutter, whether that's other windows open during a Zoom meeting. It could be cell phones, whether you're in a physical space or virtually. Just getting everything out of the way that's going to take away your ability to be present and keep that kind of safe container honored.
Right, and good. And I spoke of the clutter that the leader can put into the space. There's also, and you're speaking of the individual clutter as people are walking into a space. There's also the clutter that happens as the meeting is going along. So, one person might be really distraught, and we know that we're not going to go process that issue right in the moment, because we are moving along and it's about the collective. And in this particular example that I'm giving, we're not going to address the distraughtness, but we have to address it somehow. We have to speak to it so that the upset isn't in the space and people are distracted because we haven't addressed it, right? So in that example, it's like, listen, Joe, we really get this is a big issue. We can feel you're upset right now. Is there something that we can provide right in this moment? Because we aren't going to dive into and process it. Or is there something that we can agree to right now to handle after the meeting? So we're going to still serve that person, but not the whole meeting isn't going to get derailed from it, right? So that's an example of group clutter. Another one might be someone makes a comment and someone else gets triggered by that comment, right? And it's visible to the group, or it's just visible to you as a leader. So you, as facilitator, we're paying attention and managing these all the different ways that clutter comes into the space, and we're keeping the space clean. And this takes practice. It's so important to have an awareness of all the different types of clutter and to have a listening and trust your intuition around clutter. Okay, so we want to open it up to questions in a minute. I want to speak to the last important distinction in terms of our slides here, and this is the ripple effect. These kinds of meetings done well, ripple out and impact thousands of people, right? The work that we're doing in small group meetings with this level of trust, vulnerability, and collective wisdom, it's sacred work, in my opinion. And not only do we ripple in, it ripples into our day and our night, our dreams and our week, our you know, we get into a flow state when we're in SpiralMethod. Every member leaves, experiences and then leaves in a flow state, generally speaking, which means that we're 5 times more productive, we're more nourished and satisfied, and we're more focused, right? And so that impacts everything and all of the people that you interact with as you leave here. So we have many, 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 many stories of, you know, I don't know what you're doing in those groups, but this CEO, this leader is approachable. I feel like they listen now. We had someone recently, I think it was on our celebrity panel that we did in February, like, I don't know what group you're in, Dad, but it's making you such a better dad. I'm so glad that you're in that group. Right? So ripple effect is profound. And I know many of you have experienced this. Let's open it up to questions and then we'll do a little summary.
So, question here would be, can you give an example of how trust was cultivated in a group where there might have been some conflict?
Let me, you know, I'm going to give the example that I had in my mind earlier, where things blew up, because I think that it's a great illustration. So I had pre-conversations with people and I knew there was a lot of conflict, but I did not know how much conflict I was walking into, meaning how much distrust I was walking into. And that happened, you know, that's collectively and also between members. And so there was a woman who, we were on our pre-call, and she was really distraught about her relationship with this man. And I said, you'll know the right moment to share. And that was my first mistake. So we get into the meeting and we've set some ground rules, and people wanted to like kind of go off on some tangents. And so we hadn't fully set the ground rules yet. And then she thought, oh, this is the moment Leslie was talking about. And she just went, and high emotional content. And, you know, she starts sharing, and what she says in passing is, I mean, I don't know if his behavior is because I'm a woman, or, you know, I don't know what that's about. Well, he was the lawyer in the organization, and he immediately heard major HR risk for the company and for me personally, if she's going to, you know, call this sexism or whatever the right term is. So he just stonewalled, and we didn't know what was going on. He's like, I'm not talking. I'm not going to talk. And so that, you know, I share that as one of the examples of, wow, it just went south fast. And this is why in SpiralMethod, we have a whole separate certification for working with leadership teams where there are existing trust issues. So I'm curious if the person asking this question, Bill, has, without you know, we can keep it anonymous, but if there's another subtlety to this, let me just sink in for a minute. This is a place where the container was not set yet. And so this is why it's so critical that we create the container. I have so much experience and delight in the groups where the container is set. And here's the key. we have to slow down. Whenever there's a tension point, which is, someone is triggered, there's some, this is what gets me, is someone says, let's just agree to disagree. Like, that's a moment we're not connecting. We're not going to create some more trust if we just go, let's agree to disagree, right? So when people start getting opinionated, they start withdrawing. We could probably list 10 ways that we know that that's happening. Slow it down, have some reflection happening. There is a level in the facilitation around SpiralMethod where we keep things moving. We have a structure and we have a container, so we keep things moving. And, oftentimes inside of that structure, things flush out before we get back to that person again. So I also caution us not to sink down deeply into processing with two people, for example. So I hope that's answering the question. Is there any follow-ups on that one?
I don't see a follow-up. I'll let you know if one pops up.
Yeah.
I wanted to share a comment, and then we have one more question here.
Yeah.
We've got a comment from Ben about getting a really good feeling from what you're sharing about the concept of a ripple effect, which he hadn't considered. I guess just personally what I've seen is a tremendous ripple effect of how this work changes how people in the groups really show up every day. And I think that's extremely powerful, and also that it's inspiring more people to be a part of more of these groups and build more authentic community. And community doesn't have to just be who lives next door, but it really can be people who are sharing in support and connection of one another, and peers that want to help each other grow. I think one of the biggest things that's kind of come to light for me as of late is that once we kind of learn of whether we kind of get some epiphany or have some new spiritual teaching or have some big new revelation that changes the way we live, often that kind of wears away after a few weeks. And really what helped kind of extend that is being in community and being a part of others so that they can hold each other accountable and support each other through our growth. So just wanted to mention that.
Well, and lastly, before we move on, listen, like, especially with COVID right now, I'm finding, in my groups and in general, there's, it's usually a third, in terms of who's wearing masks, who's not wearing masks, and who can go either way. Our opinions dictate our actions. And so, there's a whole conversation to be had about what it looks like to be in the collective and make choices and decisions from the collective well-being. In my groups, when we are speaking and sharing vulnerably, there's always so many nuggets to be had from the other people. Ideas about what people are doing at home with their kids. One, a father feeling so down on himself because he's so stressed at work and he's not even leveraging his time at home now. And then hearing from other fathers that are eating up this time. Or, there's just, I can't even give enough examples, right? Like, our ability to connect with each other and to hear the real stuff of life, that's the juice. And so most people in these kinds of meetings are leaving with a more grounded space and some potent things that they're going to take on differently because of what they heard from people in the group, not because of what they heard from me. Right? That maybe because I'm part of the group, but that's a big difference. This is about the collective wisdom.
Yeah. And we've got time for one last question here. This one is going to be from Becca. Can you address how to set agreements regarding humor that divides, such that might make certain people laugh and others uncomfortable and some offended? personally, for me, it has to do with setting agreements around reducing joking and crosstalk, as those typically are ways that we avoid becoming more vulnerable. But would love to hear from you, Leslie, on that.
Oh, it's so good, Becca. So we do have in the Spiral Method, it is a cultural norm, and it takes a bit to train people and to be rigorous as the container holder. We do not have crosstalk and banter. And here's the thing, what I've found is that there's a really sweet edge around this. In the beginning of a meeting, I'll usually, people are feeling each other and connecting, and people are joking, and there's a richness to the banter and the laughter. And then I'll tone that down and bring us into a meditation and kind of officially begin the container, right? And subtly calling it out. So when we have agreements in place around these things, we then have permission to call it out. It's way harder to try to know that these are good rules for trust and vulnerability and then call it out later, right? Part of setting agreements is that we're getting permission from the group that we're going to be the guide and the container holder, and that they, over time, they begin to embrace them. So in the cultures, groups where these social norms are developed, everyone notices and they'll track themselves. This is not hard and fast, right? Like, there are times where when the laughter comes up, it's really appropriate and it's healing for people. And so these are some of the subtleties, listen, with Spiral Method, it's about trusting our intuition as the leaders and giving you all this methodology that is so crisp and clean and powerful, and letting your intuition and your personality and your own offerings to the world map up with the method itself, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to let you know we've got 4 minutes left here. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, let me just speak to a few things. I mean, here's the summary. It's the same thing that we started with, so I'm going to skip that. Bill, if you don't mind, I'll just let everyone take a minute to look at this and speak quickly. We are deepening and expanding our capacity out. We're deepening down and we're expanding out. And this is the nature of Spiral Method communities, that we get to continue to expand and grow and deepen our trust, our ability to be curious, our ability to listen, our ability to honor each other, and to heal and to transform and to create. And so this is only the beginning, actually. Yeah. The facilitation is easy. It's not a heavy lift. It's actually a very light lift. We've talked about you get to be nourished by your own leadership. You are a member and a container holder, not the pedestal person, right? Like, my groups are my people. Where we say we're doing life together. It's such a gift. The method itself trains people in emotional intelligence, not you. You can add this to any program in terms of the Spiral Method. You can add it to any program or curriculum that you have. It's not about transformation or leadership. The Spiral Method is about sustainable community, vulnerable, trusted community that lasts over time and gets better and better. We said ripple effect puts people in a flow state, and if you're out there wanting to make money with this, you make more money for your time, and it's a pretty consistent revenue. We are leading our next certification program June 18th and 19th. This is a virtual program. You can go to our website, to this link right here. It's the certification page. Get registered. We have some amazing people coming forward. I want to speak a moment to this certification. It's $1950. It is valued well over $10,000. I'll go through these one at a time, but I will be brief here. You get a certification stamp. There are programs out there that certify people in this kind of work that cost $10,000 to $40,000 per year. We are doing a lot of work on marketing and nationally and globally. So you have the backing of SpiralMethod brand. We have an amazing group of people. Like I said, we have 25 right now, and we're going to be expanding that exponentially. That's my plan. And you have a network for life. We have a Connection Revolution Facebook page. We are all collaborating, connecting, very powerful group of people, and they're all working together. We have live practice sessions and coaching during our certification training. And we're doing a bonus 3 hours of business building sessions. So anyone that's ready to go, get out and get groups started, we're going to show you how to do that right away. And then we're also adding a 6-week Kickstart coaching group after the certification program. I'm going to be leading it this time. And this is a bonus for the June program. So I hope I'm doing okay on time. 1 more minute. Thank you all so much. I really hope you join us. We need you. Humanity needs you. We are creating new social norms that are what we need right now. And we're really excited. And thank you all for being here, and let us know how we can serve and support moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, and thank you all for being here. I'll just echo that as well, that right now we need connection and community more than ever. And this method helps more than anything I've ever found to help us get to that point and help support this growth as we all evolve. So thank you all again.
All right. Bye.